The topic tonight is stop comparing. So we use the Ten Commandments as a framework for relationships, for understanding relationships. And this is commandment number 2. We'll see how this fits into the Ten Commandments. Why are we using the framework of the Ten Commandments as a framework for relationships? Because in many ways, the Ten Commandments were like a marriage contract between God and the Jewish people. The Jewish people and Hashem entered a covenant like a man and a woman, where Hashem tells the Jewish people, "You are my people, exclusively mine," and the Jewish people accept him as their God and there's no other God. And then the Ten Commandments are like the terms and agreements of that marriage. So when the Jewish people, in fact, were at Sinai, actually entered a relationship with God, but then just 40 days afterwards, what happened? They committed the sin of the golden calf, right? So this is like the betrayal. They betrayed God with the golden calf, specifically the second commandment, which said, "Thou shalt not have another God," or "don't make a graven image." And the Jewish people made a golden calf, and they violated the second commandment. So then Moses came down and he broke the tablets to nullify the marriage, so that the Jewish people will have a second chance. Because if they had been like a married woman who betrayed her husband, they could not go back to the old relationship. A new relationship had to be established. And so Moses broke the tablets. How did the golden calf start? It started, the rabbis say, at the revelation itself of Sinai. When the Jewish people saw God come down, they saw him come down with a chariot, and there were 4 faces surrounding the chariot on the wheels. These are called the ofanim. One of them happened to be the face of a bull or an ox, which is the father, the adult calf. And the Midrash says that when the Jewish people saw God, they looked away from him and they looked at the calf. And at that moment, they started the idea of idolatry already entered their mind. And then what happened later was just an expression of that. So they really, that's where the golden calf came from, and it really came from looking out what else there is, comparing. So when we try to translate the second commandment into relationships, it's appropriate that this topic of not comparing, stopping to compare, is equivalent to the second commandment of "thou shalt not have another God." In other words, exclusivity, being exclusive, not comparing, not looking elsewhere, and that's the connection between the second commandment and not comparing. So there's a blessing that we say in the chuppah that we wish the bride and groom, we wish the bride and the groom that they should be as happy as Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. What was so special about Adam and Eve's happiness in the Garden of Eden? They didn't have in-laws. Right? That's everyone's wish. There's a lot of truth to that. It's funny, but there's a lot of truth to that. But the real reason why we wish Adam and the Simcha will be like Adam and Eve's is because Adam and Eve, they didn't have anyone to compare themselves to.
Shalom, Rabbi. Mechila, I didn't know you didn't need at the conference. We should have just told
Hi,
you.
Rabbi. Hi. Sorry.
Okay.
Hi. Charlene Hakimi told me about this class. I was a little bit lost. I apologize.
Oh, well.
It took me a little bit more to find it. Okay.
So we were just saying how one of the blessings in the chuppah that we bless the bride and groom is that they should be as happy in Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And why? Because Adam and Eve did not have anyone else to compare them to. They knew it was like a match made in heaven. Not made in China, made in heaven. So they knew that this was it. And we wish the newlyweds that they should also live with that consciousness. They should know there's really nobody else for them. That this is their special mate. Right? And it's especially a blessing that's said over to newlyweds, because newlyweds, they can many times doubt if they made the right choice, because there's so many other choices. How do I know? Maybe I could have, maybe this person's the wrong person for me. Maybe I could have chosen better. So in order to remove that, we say, no, you are like Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, that you should know that this is your soulmate. Now, so the question is asked, wait a second, is this really realistic to expect people not to compare? I mean, what's the comparison to Adam and Eve? In Adam and Eve's case, and by the way, he also had something to compare to. The Midrash says that before Adam was introduced to his new wife, it said that God brought all the animals to him so that he could name them. He gave them names. And then he didn't find anyone like fit for him. And then like he fell asleep, and then Eve came. Okay, so that's not really comparing, but there was something, he saw there was nothing else other than that. But how can we say that we are expected not to compare? Because we do see a lot of, choices that he didn't have. So how's it realistic not to compare, especially in the dating process? Forget it, after you got married, that's one thing. You could say, okay, listen, you made that choice, stick with it. But beforehand, how can we be expected not to compare? And like Adam didn't have anything else to compare it to. Obviously, he's going to know it's from God. But how are we, who do see different choices, how are we expected not to compare?
Dating one at a time? Dating one at a time?
No, but you are comparing. But, because you are going out with different people, even one at a time. But I'm saying even when you're with someone, how is it fair to say, be like Adam? What's the connection here to Adam if we live in a totally different circumstances? Do you understand the question?
Yeah.
Kasha? You don't understand the kasha? Kasha, the difficulty. We're expected to be like Adam. Is that real? He didn't have anyone to compare to. We do.
Yeah, you have no temptation.
Nothing else. There's no other game in town.
That's
Yeah,
cool.
there was no external things then. Now we have external. Like Adam was in a realm where transcend the material world. So there's no right? So
Yeah,
Adam
but
was
you understand the
incarnated.
question? The question is, we do have other options.
So why
He
would you do
didn't.
that?
So how are we expected to be like Adam?
By looking at their spiritual qualities, not their physical qualities.
Okay, there's many different people with spiritual qualities. You understand the question?
Yeah.
Yes.
Adam and Eve didn't have any other options.
That's right, we
We
do.
do, yeah.
So here's the chidush. When we say that we want to strive to be like Adam, we don't mean in the circumstances that he was in. We mean, Adam, you have to understand, before the sin, he was in a certain state of being. It's called state of being, actually. Before he ate from the tree of knowledge, Adam was really connected to his very core of being, and where he's actually doesn't really need to compare, because there is a state of living that when you're connected to your very being, your very presence, your very life, living soul, and you're fully living, and you're connected to that power. Yeah, it means you're connected to your very being. That's the level that Adam was on before the sin. And when you're on that level, okay, you don't compare. Why don't you compare? And we'll see where compare comes from.
Because you're so content with your current state.
Correct. But there's a certain illusion that leads a person to compare. And there's different types of comparing. There's comparing yourself to other people to see how good you are, if you are, smart, or whether you're skilled, so you compare yourself to others. There's comparing what you have to others many times, like, what have I achieved? Well, let's look around. Let's look at everyone else. And then we measure ourselves up to other people. Then there's comparing your spouse. Well, let's see, how did this person do? They married someone so successful, and what about me? And comparing and dating, there's all sorts of comparing, but they all stem from one place.
Lack of emunah.
Well, lack of emunah, you can call it like that, but it's much deeper than just not having emunah. Because emunah, it's something good you could say. This is a state of consciousness, okay, that people are in. And that state is called ego. We spoke about this last time. What is this ego? We don't mean ego, big ego. Remember from last time what we meant by ego?
The feeling of disconnection, I believe.
Ego
Or separation.
is a sense of self that you feel like a separate entity. In other words, you see yourself as someone who you're not, and you live in an illusion that you are your own thing. This is the mindset of someone who's living through the ego. They look at themselves as a separate entity, separate from everyone else, and not in a state of connectedness and oneness. Yeah, you live in an illusion. You basically live in an illusion, and the ego likes to compare. Why does the ego like to compare? The ego likes to compare because it fuels the ego. We say again, ego is not like, I'm better than anyone. Ego is just a false sense of self. It's like when you identify yourself with something else that you're not. So it could be something like we said, external identity, career, your job, your money, your desires, your dreams, whatever it is. You identify with that, you live through ego. And therefore, when you live in that state of ego, you live in a state of separateness, you see yourself as separateness, and the ego likes to compare. Why? Because the ego, because it wants to feel special and unique, it needs the comparison. It needs to feel, I'm special, I'm unique. And how do you do that? You compare. You want to see, how am I different from that person? And how am I different from this person? That sense of uniqueness, of trying to always be special and unique, comes from the ego. It's not who you are, but it's who you think you are through the ego. And therefore you start comparing. And you're always caught up in comparing. And this is very, very destructive. Because when you live in a world of comparison, you, other than the fact that it sucks all your energy, you obviously are not connected to yourself. It's an indication that if you're comparing all the time, you're not connected to yourself. Because when you're in your state of oneness and being, you don't feel the need to compare anymore. You feel that what this person has, you're part of the whole thing. You don't feel like it's diminishing you, or whatever it is, actually threatens yours. It's a very deep idea. So being connected that was the level of Adam before the sin. Adam before the sin did not feel like he was a separate unit from God. When a person, like you said, lack of emunah, it's much deeper than lack of emunah. You're separate from God. When you live through the ego, you're not connected to the oneness of the universe, the life force that drives everything. And when you're not connected to that life force, you're not connected to God, because He is that life. He is that life force that's behind everything, every organism. And when you're connected to that, you don't compare because you're one with everything. You understand? Is that making sense? And that's inner conflict. That's always in conflict. You'll always be in conflict. Because you're always never going to find satisfaction or fulfillment. As long as you keep comparing, you can never, by definition, find fulfillment when you compare, because the ego is driving you. Whatever you have is not going to be enough. It's a self-destructive pattern. So you are fueling the ego when you compare, because that's what it wants, but it's always going to lead to this inner conflict. Yeah, sorry, you cut it.
Is there a constructive way of thinking or of trying to be unique that isn't ego associated?
So your question is, can you feel unique, but in a healthy way?
Right.
So it's true, every person is unique, but they don't have to see themselves as a separate unit to be unique. In other words, if you are connected, yeah, to what we call this eternal life force, and you're present, and you're connected to the presence of life, to the life force, you actually, the things that are in you, you allow them to come out naturally, without thinking about, how am I unique? How am I special? How am I different than this person? What am I doing? What can I do that's different than this person? You are different, and it just comes out. So that is something that comes out naturally. You don't have to think about it. When you start thinking about it, who is doing the thinking? The ego. And the ego is identifying he's helping you identify yourself with different things. Oh, you're better looking than that person, or you're smarter, or you're less, or you have less. That's the ego identifying you. And then you get caught up in identification. And identification is actually totally egoic state of mind, and you're disconnected from who you really are, which is we said, the Torah says, a living presence. The Torah says this. Vayi Adam, man was lenefesh chaya, a living presence. That's who you are. If you are able to live on this level of living presence, you're never going to go into conflict. You always have inner peace because you're totally in sync with one. It's opposite of what's going on in the world. And what's going on in the world is just comparing, and is driven by a totally ego-minded mentality of who's better than who, and how to be at the top and to always climb higher and higher. It's dysfunctional. And the higher you go, the more dysfunction you'll find, because it's something you can't fulfill. There's no fulfillment in that. It's just inner conflict and destructive. But that's the world we live in, a world of dysfunction. So when you actually look and you start comparing, what you do is actually you're looking away from yourself. You're not connected to yourself. You're looking away from yourself. There's a nice story, and you miss out really being connected to yourself and who you are. There's a nice story. It's like more of like a parable that I heard. So there was a raven, a black raven that was thought life is happy life, content with life, and then he sees a dove, like a white dove, and then he says, "Wow, that's a beautiful bird. Look at me, I'm black. Not, I scare people. People don't like me around. Look at this dove, he's all white." So he goes to the dove and he says, "You must be like the happiest bird. You're all white." He said, "You know what? I used to think like that too." And then he said, "I saw the parrot, and the parrot has two colors. I just have one color." So, the raven goes to speak with the parrot, and he says, "Wow, you're beautiful. You have two colors. You must love life." He said, yeah, I used to think like that too, but then I saw the peacock. The peacock, he's got much more colors than me. He's beautiful. Everybody wants to look at him. And, okay, I have two colors. It's pretty plain." So the raven goes to the peacock, and the peacock is in the zoo. And hundreds of people are looking at him and marveling at his beauty. And then he says to the peacock, "You must be so happy to be a peacock." And he said, "Yeah, you know what, I used to think like that, but then, because of my beauty, I'm in the zoo. I'm in a cage. And who I wish I could be? I wish I could be just like the raven. I see the raven goes freely, roams freely." So then the raven, realizes basically what it means to be a raven, what it means to be unique. When you look away at people, you fail to see your uniqueness. You fail to see what is your God-given gift and talent and you don't even see it. You're not connected to it. Whereas if you focus on just living and being present, you see those things and you understand what your mission is. You see what your special and unique talents and God-given gifts are, and you just let them unfold. You don't need to compare yourself in order to say, oh, is it good enough? Am I good enough? Is this life good enough? Okay. You just let the things take their course without comparing. So when we compare, we're looking away from ourselves. We're not connected to ourselves, leads to much dysfunction, and it leads to a lot of loss of energy. You find yourself, really not being able to enjoy your life because you're always comparing. Okay, but what about them? So some people would ask a question here. Don't you need to compare your potential, like when it comes to comparing spouse, don't you need to compare your potential spouse to other people to see if it's the best fit? Maybe that's how you come to know yourself. It's like trying out new clothes at the store. You try this one on, you try this one on, you see which one, fits you best. Isn't dating the same thing? Saying no. Why not?
You're not a shirt.
You're not a shirt.
You're not a car. It's like shopping for a car.
Okay, so you think you have to compare to see like which one you get to know about yourself when you go out and you find and you compare and you go out with different people.
Yeah.
Why not?
Then you need to know about other people. You're not getting to know about yourself.
So that's actually true. You don't need to compare to know what you like. That's the biggest mistake people think. People think that when you compare, you know what you like. No. Whatever fits you, you try it on to see if it fits you, but you don't need to compare. So if you are connected to who you are, you will see who fits you. You will see who connects with you naturally. You won't need to compare. It just won't connect to you if it's not for you. It'll just bounce off of you. But when you are not yourself and you try to compare, you cannot find who you are through another person. If you're not connected to who you are, that person is not going to connect you to who you are. So, what about comparing yourself to someone below you? Makes you feel better about yourself. Is that okay? Like when you're having a bad day, and you say, well, look at this person. Look at what bad state they're in. And then you suddenly feel like a boost. Like, oh yeah, I should be happy. So is that okay? That type of comparing?
I don't see why not. Like, it can get you to be grateful for what you have.
Mm-hmm. But you're still comparing.
You're comparing, but you're like feeling blessed that you're not in a worse position.
No argument that it makes you feel good. Is that actually a good thing to compare just because it makes you feel good?
I'm guessing the answer is no.
I'm open, but you think yes, maybe? No, speak your mind.
Probably not, but I get what you're saying also. I feel like it's also it's a little bit more of an old school mentality that they always, like I remember growing up, I was a very picky eater, and the speech that I used to get is, oh, their children in Somalia, you know what I mean? Like we were, at least sometimes I feel like I was compared to things, or I was reminded of people that had lesser things that I felt like I counted my blessings. But as an adult, you can play both sides of the field. You can say, why do you have to depend? Why does your self-esteem or what you perceive yourself as, why should that depend on someone else's lesser beings?
Misfortune's right.
Misfortunes. You should know where you are without depending on someone else. Then you can also say that when you're feeling.
I don't think you should depend on it. I think I agree with it that you should have that sense of wholeness by yourself. But let's say you do find a lacking one day, like, oh, I'm 5'8". Like, why can't I be 6 foot tall? And then you see someone that's 5. Not to say anything
Five
bad
foot
about.
like
Thank
me.
you.
No, sorry. Not to say
No,
anything
it's
bad.
okay.
I'd say, sorry.
I know.
You get what I'm saying? Like,
I know how miserable I am. Now I know
Sorry.
how miserable I am.
No,
No, he was just giving a general example.
my best
yeah.
friend is 5 feet tall. Like, but
Short but good, don't worry.
yeah, exactly. Big things come in small packages. But I think you can, like, if you come from a state of wholeness already, I think it's not a bad thing to, if you're in a bad place, to see someone that's in a worse place and just be like, man, I have it good. Like, why am I
Well,
even
that's also
stressing?
just like the attitude of gratitude.
Attitude of gratitude,
It's
exactly.
just being grateful, but that's also, that comes with feeling grateful and counting your blessings every day.
Definitely.
Not
Yeah.
just
I agree.
feeling grateful
I
as soon
agree.
as you see someone as miserable.
I agree.
So,
Yeah.
So what's your name?
Mona,
Mona. So Mona brought up a good point. When you feel a boost because you compare yourself to someone who's lower than you, that's called like downward comparing. There's upward comparing. So like when you're comparing yourself to someone who's lower than you. So you get a boost. You might think it gives you a sense of gratitude, but what it really does, it actually fuels the ego even more.
Interesting.
Why? Because it alienates you from the other person. Oh, I'm glad I'm not that person, right? So we should actually feel a sense of peace and oneness, and we should feel actually love for that person, or some type of mercy
empathy.
or empathy with him. But what the ego does is it gets a boost. And look at all the newspapers. They love putting the celebrities who fail and bad things happen to them on the front page, because in some way people like say, oh, so even these people have problems. You know, we're not alone. Even these big shots, right?
Mhm.
But this is a negative thing because it's fueling the ego again. It's fueling that sense of alienation and saying, no, you are, separate. Okay? You are who you are, and be grateful for what you have, but it's not the sense of oneness that you need to feel together yet with the universe.
But if you feel mercy for someone in that situation, you still naturally feel blessed that you're not in that situation because you feel bad for them. No?
You feel kind of together with them.
No.
If you are on a level of really living in the presence, you feel like, you feel like it's a part of you. You feel like it's a part of you that's going through this experience, and you're able to connect to them. You're not necessarily
I didn't.
feeling just mercy, but you are able to even take some of their pain out if you're with them. I mean, if you just hear about them far, but if you're with someone and you're with them and you're there, you're able to actually have that impact on them. But yeah, you don't necessarily, I mean, you're always going to be trapped on some level on that egoic state until you fully, break out. But you should not feel any, you shouldn't feel any pleasure at all from that person's suffering.
No, God
Just-
forbid. That's not what I was saying.
No, not pleasure that you're happy, but we naturally become grateful.
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, that's many times that, that egoic state that we feel like, oh, I'm glad to be me. It's hard to avoid it.
Mm.
Then there's what's called upward comparing, and this is the worst. This is when you compare yourself to someone who's higher than you. Okay, so someone's like doing better in life than you, and this just makes you feel very insignificant. Okay, it makes you feel like whatever you have is like worthless. It's like as if you don't have anything to be happy about, and it's so much, it diminishes your ego. You don't feel any satisfaction in what you have. And the question is, why do we do it then? I mean, if it makes us feel bad, I understand the other side, the downward. Okay, at least you get a boost. You feel better about yourself. Okay, it's logical why someone would do something. But why would someone constantly compare themselves to someone who's higher than them when they know that it's going to make them feel awful? It's going to make them feel like they don't have anything. They can't compare to that person. Like whatever they have doesn't compare. Why would someone do that? And yet there's some addiction. right? We see people doing it, right? Why are people doing it if it's making you feel bad, if it sucks all your energy away?
I mean, I feel like there's a healthy way to that too. They can inspire you to rise as well. You know, like for instance, like why am I connected to you and other rabbis? Because you guys know more than me. I can either be like, oh, he knows more than me, I suck, or I could be like, I can learn from this man. So
you're saying there's something positive about it.
yeah,
But how come sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative?
I guess the intention matters.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
So here's a subtle point. The ego is addicted to comparing. You know why? Because the ego never has enough. It always wants more. So you hit some level of success. So now the ego is like, okay, but there's more. Like him. He's got more. They have more. That's where you should be. So the ego, because it's constantly wants to feel special and unique, it has to always compare itself because it always wants more. But that comparison actually fires back and it says, oh, so I don't have enough yet because I'm not like them. And that's where I should be. And then when you get to that, you compare it to the next level. The ego never feels fulfilled. It always wants more. You can't really satisfy it. So it's constant, it's a vicious cycle. Comparing and wanting more, comparing and wanting more. It never ends until there's dysfunction, so much dysfunction that you start harming yourself and there's a lot of inner conflict. When is comparison good? Not when you're comparing yourself to someone else, but when you actually want to say, oh, I don't want to be like that, but I'm interested to know how this works. That's not me. It's not identification anymore. When you don't identify and you say it's not me, then you just see it as something for what it is and you say, I want to see how this works. And you don't feel like it's diminishing you. So that type of comparison is maybe the comparison that you're talking about. So I want to see what they have. Like for example, you open up a business and you want it to work. So you want to compare models and you want to see, okay, how does this work? Or how did he get this to work? It's not like, oh, I want to be like this person.
But in a way, yes, Raf, because if you're comparing, in a way, you want to be like that thing that you're comparing to. That's why you're getting example. Example, like I'm trying to explain, like in our job, they always ask us to bring comparables. Why do you think they ask us? Because they want to bring the same thing. So what scatters this?
Should I get it?
Jealousy, Raf. You
Go
get how to
ahead.
do it?
I have no idea, to be honest.
Fine. Sorry.
So I can't respond to you because you're leaving.
Yeah, I was going to just relax, but don't worry, continue.
But what Yona's saying is,
Yeah, leave the door open.
The lights were open.
it's the whole building. Yeah. Comparing doesn't always have to be with jealousy. If you're comparing yourself to a person, and then it's a problem. But if you're just comparing ideas, if you're just comparing to see what works, obviously you can learn and you can learn to improve it, whatever you want to improve, without feeling bad about it. Just like you want to compare prices. You don't want to. There's nothing bad about comparing prices. You just want to see what's the best price. There's no identification. There's no self-identification in that type of comparing. You're comparing something. You're comparing things, ideas. But when you start comparing yourself and your life situation to someone else's life situation, and you're seeing all the differences, that's definitely destructive. And this is one of the things about challenges of especially living in community. When you live in a community, and if it's a close-knit community, you almost can't help but get caught up in constant comparing of what people have, especially today with the technology, that people sending pictures and photographs of where they were on vacation and their
Oversharing.
clothing, and you're like, you can't help but compare. Wait a second, you know, why, you know, maybe I should be going on vacations too.
It's
So I
not
go on
attention,
vacation.
not
Is
it's
my
not-
life okay? Because I'm not doing this. So you start comparing, and you look at people. Oh, they have a home. I'm living and I'm renting an apartment. Is that normal? Does that mean I'm not? My life situation is not good.
It's just to boost attention, Rabbi. I think that like people that they go on vacation and they post it, they're dumbasses because it's just bust. Sorry for the word.
No
I want to
offense,
be
yeah.
very frank. It's
No
just
offense
busted
for
jealousies
them.
because, for example, the guy that cannot go in that time, poor guy, he stays home, and he's on his TV and he's looking. He's like, oh shit, come on. Like everybody's out and I'm not.
You're more likely to rob those, so if you post that you're on vacation.
Well, I'm just giving an example, but today we have so much information that's shared that people are constantly feeling that, wait a second, I have to how do I measure my life? By looking at how other people are doing, and then I look back at my life to see if I'm considered successful or not, right? So it's very challenging today to live in a community like that, where everyone is doing it, and it's like, and if you're not comparing, you might think that something is not normal with you because you're left behind. You have to like compare in order to stay up, you know, to stay
Maintain the
with,
status.
yeah, maintain the status. And if you don't compare, it's like you're out of the market. You're like not in a competition, which is the biggest illusion, because all this comparison does is make people feel insufficient and bad, and it makes them feel totally disconnected from who they are, and it's all up front. It's all to show everyone that, you know, I'm just, you know, just as good as anyone, right? When we're really feeling a lot of lack of inner peace inside, and no one feels good doing this. It's impossible to feel good because you are not living your life. You are living someone else's life. And when you're living someone else's life, then there's dysfunction inside. It's something that you can't control even. The state of, the natural state, which is the healthy state, is a state of being where you are just connected to who you are, to yourself, and you could live in a community, but you don't have to compare all the time. You could love everyone, and you could accept everyone, and without comparing and without having to, you know, to constantly gauge where you are. So this is one of the main important points of the second commandment. Stop comparing. When you stop comparing, you know, it's only when you reach this level of realizing really who you are and not identifying with your ego, fake sense of self, false sense of self, which always is fueled by being separate and unique. Realize that you're at one. And when you're at one and you're living a living presence, you don't need to compare because you're part of everyone. Just like you don't compare yourself to yourself, or you don't compare yourself to your child. People don't compare themselves to their children. And I say, let's see how, because the child is part of them. When you feel a part of everything, you stop comparing. There's no me. There's no you. It's all a sense of oneness. There's no need to compare anymore. And when you stop comparing, you feel so much more at peace because there's no pressure now to try to be something that you're not. So you are happy with what you have, you feel in peace, and you become more successful, not less. Comparing is not going to make you more successful. It might push you to do things, but it doesn't mean you're successful, because at the end of the day, your success is going to come from you doing what you really are meant to do. So whether it's relationship, and this is very destructive in relationship, to compare. You know, many times people get stuck, they feel like they get stuck in a relationship and they see how happy other couples are and how well off they are, and it just, it separates people. The more you compare, the more you can become separate from people, separate from yourself, and that's really something that you need to work on. If you catch yourself comparing, you need to keep reminding yourself, wait a second, this is all an illusion. I'm not separate from any of us. I'm a living presence, they're a living presence, we're all just a living presence, and there's really no me or them. It's just, it's a consciousness that you need to have. When you're not in that consciousness, you're in an unconscious state. If you're living in an unconscious state, your thoughts take control of you, you start identifying. When you start identifying, you get into that mode, you start thinking, you have all these mental images of people, of things, and you start thinking that, it's me and them, and then when you start feeling bad inside, that's when you know your ego is feeling diminished. And the ego is addicted to this. It's addicted to doing this because it fuels its existence of feeling special and distinct. Even feeling bad sometimes is addictive. Because when you feel bad, through comparison, you feel separate. You feel unique. So it's an addictive thing to compare. Because on the one hand, it makes you feel bad, but on the other hand, you become addicted to feeling bad because it fuels your ego. Oh, look at me. I'm this person who's so sad. I'm this person who's, suffering. I'm this person who doesn't have. It becomes addictive. So as soon as you feel that, you need to know this is not a state of mind, that you're unconscious right now, and need to wake up into consciousness and just be and stop thinking. Remember, your mind is your worst enemy. The situation is never bad as your thoughts about the situation. Your thoughts about the situation are really what's fueling this whole thing, not the situation. The situation is fine. Right? If you were able to, like right now, this moment, is there any problem here? Anyone has any problem? No problem, right? If you were able to live like every moment, like right now, this second, there's no problem, then you would be free from all this inner conflict and suffering. It's constant thinking, compulsive thinking about your situation and other people's situation and where am I compared to them. That's really eating you up. And it's all an illusion of the mind, and it's an addiction that we all need to break out of. So that's the second commandment. Just like in the second commandment, God said, you shall not have another God. Don't go out, don't comparing. It's just me and you. So too in relationships, you have to know it's you. There is nothing else, because there is no really just me and you. There's only like a sense of oneness and wholeness.
So does the other person even exist?
They exist as living space. Living space means that when a living presence. That means that they are here, you are here, but all there is your presence together. All these identifications of who they are, what they are, it's all something that the mind produces, and when you start getting caught up in it, it leads to just separation and alienation and obviously inner conflict. If you were able to just realize this, there would be no inner conflict, right? But because we get caught up in they're like this, and they're, it's again, separating. It's like, this is the source of a lot of inner tension. Do you guys understand? Is it's making sense?
I don't really understand how you could think that in a relationship, or you don't think about. I don't really get it.
When you're focused on just being, and you're alert, like right now, Imagine you could do this all the time. You don't think. You just are. When you start thinking, it's like you enter your world and you start having thoughts, right? And these thoughts aren't real. They're just thoughts. But what do these thoughts do? They cause you to identify yourself in a situation, to identify you versus them, you know, that, and you become disconnected from everything else. So the thing is, don't get into that illusion, because it's just an illusion of your mind. And all it does is make you have a very, very dreadful experience, which isn't real. If you're able to live each moment in the present moment as a living presence and not have these thoughts, no situation will cause you to suffer.
What are some tools to stay present? Because I feel like
Stay conscious.
To stay conscious.
Like, for example, if you have thoughts, don't just have the thoughts, observe them.
Be mindful of them.
See, oh, now I'm thinking this. Oh, now I feel the tingling negative sensation inside starting. Oh, there it is. You connect to that energy. You feel it. You don't just, and you don't let it control you and get like, oh, then what's going to happen? What if this happens? And then what if this happens? And then I'm going to find myself on the street. And then life's going to be miserable, right? It's that mind track that when you get caught up in the thoughts about, yeah, what if, the fear. Because one of the things about the ego is that the ego is afraid. What is it afraid of? It's afraid of loss. It's afraid of not having, and it's afraid of death. Okay? But death is actually the biggest release. It's the end of the ego. Right? It's actually where life begins. So when you realize that it's just fear in your mind, you're liberated. When you tell yourself, oh, this is just fear. When you're aware of that fear, you become free. When you are afraid, and you let those thoughts take control of you, then you identify with your ego, with that fear. You say, oh, I'm afraid. But it's really all in your mind. So consciousness and awareness of that is the first step. And then being able to tune out of that and jump back into presence, that's like the next step. If you don't do that, you could have good thoughts, bad thoughts, it doesn't matter. You're disconnected from your presence. You always have to stay connected to your presence, no matter what happens. You can't let your mind and your thoughts take control of you. It requires a lot of mental conditioning, because we're conditioned to always think. Right? We think that. Yeah. Our mind is producing thoughts, so let's think. But it's really not, it's really the opposite. Your mind is like your worst enemy. If you could just shut it off 80% of the time and use it when you need to, like when you need to do something or you need to plan something, you'd be a much happier person, healthier person. You wouldn't be comparing. You would just be busy with living. So it's like almost like it's like an arm. When you don't need your arm, you just let it rest. Your mind is a tool. Just use it when you need to. When you don't, put the tool down. Just be. So, in essence, all of these things are always coming back to the same point. Same point of like the source of this inner peace that we need to find in our relationships and in life always boils down to the same point. It's really getting out of this egoic state of consciousness and into a state of presence and being where everything is peaceful, where you're at peace with yourself and you don't feel threatened by anyone, you don't feel fear, you don't feel like a loss, and you feel alive. How do you know you're connected to it? When you feel a sense of aliveness. When you don't feel a sense of aliveness, that means you are caught up in the thoughts. Because when you're connected to the presence and you are a life force, that aliveness comes out. When that aliveness doesn't come out, it means you're not present. It means you're here.
So you're not thinking, do you automatically connect to whatever it is?
Not if you're getting drunk. In other words, there's different ways to stop thinking. Playing video games, watching movies. That's not thinking, but that's not being present. Being present, being totally engrossed in the present moment, feeling the stillness that exists right now, in this room. That's presence, but not shutting off. You understand the difference?
You said feeling alive. Let's say, God forbid, not this class, but if I was in a different class and I didn't feel alive and I was bored, but I was there and I was present.
In every situation that you're in, you're able to find the stillness, even in harsh situations. It exists. It exists in the present moment. It's the energy that's in the present moment. No matter what situation you're in, you'll be able to find it. There won't be a dull moment.
And that's feeling alive.
That feeling of aliveness comes when you're connected to that energy. Presence. That's where God is. It says that God is not, He's not up there, He's not in the noise, He's not in the fire. God is in the stillness of the moment. Because God is an all-present being. That's what He is, omnipresent. He's always in the present and only in the present. He's not in the past, and He's not in the future. He's only in the present. So connecting to the present is connecting to God. He's not boring. That's the source of life, right? He's driving every organism at this moment, right? So imagine you're connected to that vast life force. There's never a dull moment, but it's always a battle because the thoughts take over and they take you away.
So you're saying, like, for example, in the realm of dating, when you're very much in the present and you're in the moment and your thoughts are shut off and you're being true to yourself, that's when you get real clarity.
You will right away know whether there's a real connection. You will know it, you will feel it. And even if that person is not where you are, you will also see. You'll also feel that there is a connection here. Without judging. Without thinking so much. Just your very being with them, you'll feel that, that this is the one. And if it's not, you'll feel it right away too.
You have to feel it right away. Now, if you're thinking, let's say you're thinking for months, and then one day you're like, oh, let me not think so much. Then can you feel it?
You
Are
mean
there rules? I'm thinking too much now. You said you'll know right away, but no one doesn't think a lot in the beginning, or ever really.
Or opposite, or in the beginning you don't think as much, and then if it's turning into something a little more serious, you start questioning more.
So what
And
point
then
are
what?
we talking about? Like, at any point?
at any point you could tune back in, and once you tune back in, it'll come on its own. You won't have to do anything. You don't have to impose your
It just happens.
You don't have to impose your judgment on it and force it, because you don't control the forces. You just let them pass through you. So it'll just happen. You don't have to try so hard.
Present moment doesn't lie.
Yeah, just step back, relax, and that's what Emunah is, really. Emunah is really acceptance, that you're a part of everything here, and you're part of this big thing, and
It's like that surrender.
yeah, surrender yourself.
What about Hishtadlut?
Hishtadlut is focusing on the actions that you need to do, and not more than, and you feel that too. You thirsty, you drink. You don't say, oh, I have to drink. You don't think at 2 p.m. I have to have a glass. You feel, oh, there's a need arising, so I drink. There's a need to eat, so I eat. When there's a need to work, you will work. When there's a need to do an action, that need will arise on its own, and you will feel like, now it's
Rise
time.
the occasion.
Now it's time. But thinking all the time, what do I need to do? And forcing ourselves to do things, that leads to inner conflict. And if you live in a state of inner conflict all the time and you don't have that peace, you're afflicting suffering on yourself for nothing. So most of the suffering that people have self-inflicted just because of this, because they're like always thinking. So it almost sounds like it's simple. It sounds simple, but it's liberating. It's not. You don't have to work so hard to have this. You just have to learn how to be aware. Have consciousness. Don't be unconscious. Be very alert.
Okay.
All right. So, God willing, next week, commandment number 3. So that's going to be communication. Not saying God's name in vain, right? So not